This is Susan Schultz, Executive Director at the Museum of Broadcast Communication, welcoming you to Happy Half Hour. And for those of you who've been here before, you know those are the chimes that I have stolen from the museum, although our artifacts director knows that. And it's the one thing I brought here to remind me during the pandemic of the museum, the wonderful place at 360 North State Street. And just so you know, we are open now. We're open on the weekends. We're so excited. We open July 24th, and that's Friday, Saturday, and Sunday. So you have to, until August 2nd, we will be free. So please join us. We want to say welcome back. But also remember that you do have to go to our website, museum.tv, to register even for a free ticket. We are making sure that you will be safe and that our staff will be safe. And so we are only taking about 10 visitors per hour, giving you about an hour and a half in the museum, and making sure that you also have a mask when you come to visit us. But we're very excited. We have Stay Tuned, which is an exhibit about rock and roll and television and how both of those industries uplifted the other in their infancy, which is really very cool. There's a lot of music, there's a lot of guitars, there's a lot of wonderful stories to be told if you grew up in the rock and roll era. And you got to bring your kids and you got to make them listen to the songs you love and to talk about the stories and your first concert. So that would be great. And we want you, while you're there or before you come, please join us in a membership at the museum. Membership is $49 a year. And for that, you're going to get a $140 value of classic radio shows, 70 free shows, so that you can listen to those. Some of them are Sherlock Holmes, some of the really great shows and that radio is produced. Remember, this is the 100th year, the 100th anniversary of radio. So these 70 shows are a great way to celebrate radio tradition, radio heritage. Thanks to Carl Omari, who's on our board, who really curated these for us, and that would be great. And online also, we want you to visit www.greatdebates.org. Great Debates is the curriculum and website that we put up for teachers during the election, during the yes, we're in a presidential election. I know we all forget about that, but we are looking at the effect of the broadcast industry, whether it's radio, whether it's television, whether it's digital, on the presidential debates. Because every time broadcast industry steps in and changes, the one thing we know that is normal is it keeps iterating and it keeps evolving. And each time it evolves, even if it goes to a new medium, it causes disruption because it changes the norm for everybody. And that's very clear in the presidential debates. So please visit that website. We're going to have updates to that throughout the fall. And there's curriculum there. There's 5 modules, and pretty soon, there will be 4 for teachers to download for free to teach 9th through 12th graders. So that's my standard. That's my standard patois here. I am telling you what we're up to, but I am also very excited today that we have a guest who I'm a big fan of, George Offman. George, thank you so much for joining us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah. Well, you're not totally great, but you are great in so many ways. But you have made a change in your career, or you were asked to make a change in your career. Could you tell? You have been on BBM radio as a sportsman for years. Tell us a little bit about what has happened.
Well, I think the pandemic may have happened, and I lost my job after being there for nearly 10 years at really one of the premier radio stations in the United States. You know, when I was a kid listening to WBBM, really when it began in 1968, I never had any visions of being part of it, but I was fortunate to join it almost 10 years ago. And sometimes things happen in life, and this happened, and so we move forward. Me and the guy behind me over here, who's, I have to tell you right now, I'm still better looking than him. I just don't know how long that's going to be.
He might be younger than you and me. Exactly who this guy is, and he's been with you since college, correct?
Yeah, that is Alfred E. Newman from Mad Magazine, actually given to me as a black light photo by my brother in 1973 as a gift to take down to Southern Illinois University, where I began my broadcast career, and he has traveled with me ever since. And he is a reminder, I believe now, when the term "what me worry," that's kind of me now. There's really nothing to worry about despite my current situation. I try to look at the positive side of things.
Well, part of the reason that we're talking to you today is we're celebrating you, and we're celebrating not just your past but also your future, because we are positive that that will be strong as well. But it is a very rough time in radio. Correct? It is the pandemic has happened, and people, media in general, are shrinking. And so you have seen a lot of that, right, with colleagues. I know I have seen a lot of that with my media colleagues.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we've seen it first in the newspaper business, which shrinks and shrinks and shrinks, and then you have conglomerates taking over, and there are people I know at the Tribune that are just very nervous. It certainly has
Mhm.
happened in the radio business in the past few years, and certainly with the pandemic. There are colleagues of mine, a longtime friend, David Schuster, whom I actually hired at Southern Illinois University 45 years ago, who recently also lost his position. Um, and I feel terrible about that, but I also feel positive about certain people who have gained positions. People like Andy Mazer, who was the voice of the San Diego Padres for a number of years, a Chicagoan, worked with the Cubs, and then was out of a job for a number of years, and recently was working with the White Sox. And with the unfortunate passing of Ed Farmer, was able to replace him. And so that's good news. It's good news when you see people are able to find work in our industry. So I look at that as being a positive. The rest of it is simply a sign of the times.
Totally, totally it is. And actually, you and I were talking a little bit earlier about social media. Social media is, blessing and a curse in so many different ways. We were talking about these large organizations having so much control over things, but on the other hand, it's one thing that has helped get the word out about what happened with you. Sometimes when people are downsized out, it's a very quiet move, right? It's not something that companies want to necessarily say, but we all learned about you on social media. Is that correct?
Well, yeah, I mean, first of all, it started with Robert Feeder because this is what Robert Feeder does, and he's a good
Right.
man for our industry. And then Paul Sullivan of the Tribune, who I've known now for the better part of close to 40 years, wrote a wonderful piece about me, and um, it shows you the reach that it has because my Twitter page and Facebook page lit up. And then I wrote a few because I was absolutely overwhelmed by the support and the words of encouragement and the compliments that I was receiving. It got to the point where it's midnight. Okay, I'm answering these people at midnight, and it was endless for like 48 hours. People in our industry who I'd never met, people in the news
Right.
business who I'd never met, people who were listeners, and I I'm not speechless very often, but I was then. I cannot thank these people enough for their generosity and their outpouring of encouragement. That's a very positive thing. And yes, the internet has had a dramatic change in our industry, particularly people who do what I do for a living, which is a sports anchor and reporter. I did that at the Score for many years. Eventually, it got rid of sports anchors who were delivering the sports news. ESPN National did that. ESPN Local did that. So that now you have, generally speaking, WBBM and I think WGN might be the only ones who employ sports anchors and reporters, and it is a shrinking business. I have said this before, Susie. I'm in a dinosaur business, and unfortunately, I happen to be the dinosaur of dinosaurs.
Well, it's okay. Many people love dinosaurs. I have a brother-in-law who, when he was at UFC, used to work on sports phone because people had no way to get scores, right? But calling into the phone, that one went out right away. He ended up having a second act in law and is doing very well. But he was
Well,
positive. Big
that's
sports
where I
guy.
began my that's where I began my Chicago professional career, was at Sports Phone, and
Oh,
that began in December. Actually, my first day was Christmas Eve, 1977, and the person who took me through my first day there was Fred Huebner, and Fred still works at ESPN Radio. And that
yeah.
office included Les Grobstein, and Les does the overnight sports at the Score. Les is a rather interesting fellow. That's the best
Mhm.
way to put it, but he's got a cult following. Also in that
Yeah.
office was Ron Gleason, who is still the brand manager at WBDM Radio. But what it did was it spawned so many people in this industry. I can't even begin to give you the list, from Jeff Joniak, the voice of the Bears, and Luke Canellis, and David Schuster, and Brian Wheeler, who was for many years the voice of the Portland Trailblazers. In New York, Gary Cohen, the voice of the New York Mets now for many, many years. John Martin, who is the executive producer of ESPN Radio. You go on and on and on, and so many people in business began their careers giving sports news basically to gamblers on the phone.
Right, right, right. So let's go back to Fritz Coleman, who's engineering for us today. Thank you so much, Fritz. We value and adore you. Could you maybe put up that picture that we have? I think we have a couple. Well, hello there, young man.
If I was only that age again. Uh,
Oh, remember the problem.
that's a,
Um,
that was my first promotional picture when I was trying to sell myself at Southern Illinois University. So I was 23, I believe, trying to get a job in television, because I was doing television, I was doing radio, I was doing play-by-play of baseball, um,
mhm,
and there were certain things I was willing to do and certain things I wasn't willing to do. One of them
mhm.
was not to accept a job in a television station in North Dakota on an Indian reservation. I said, I don't know about that one. And
Yeah.
then, luckily for me, not that long after that came Sports Phone. And that eventually led me to do this, which was freelancing. That happened almost by accident. Somebody
Mhm.
suggested, did you know that when you go to a game, you can sell your sound? Well, back then, as I came to realize, there were an enormous amount of radio networks and outlets which would pay you to get the sound. And this is the way we got the sound. We would take the telephone. For those people who may not know, we used to have telephones. Kids
Oh
do
yeah,
not know what a telephone is.
let me be very clear that this device is what you
Yes,
have up to your ear in that picture, only in its one of its earlier iterations. Yeah.
that's correct.
That's
So what you did was you took off the mouthpiece, and there were corresponding cords to that, and you had what was called alligator clips. And you would
right.
connect them to that. Those clips then would connect to your recorder. Your microphone would connect to your recorder, and you were able to speak and send audio at the same time. That's the way we did it, as opposed to where you do it by computer now and edit it. That's how we sent our material. Um, other than when and if I talked to an editor at NPR, where I worked for 20 years for the morning edition, I would call them and I said, okay, here's what it's going to sound like. But then you'd go into a studio. Well, this is how I did this with myriad networks, from the CBS radio network to ABC to NBC to the Mutual Radio Network, on and on and on and on. And I did
Mhm.
that for 13 years. Uh, that was my only job. I was my only boss. And it was an absolutely spectacular life. I loved doing that. I was able to basically um, really not only just make a career for myself, but I
Mhm.
think that people in the industry understood who I was, what I was doing, and I was able to promote myself that way. It was wonderful. It was a great time in my career.
So can I ask you one of the stories you remember that stands out to you? One of the moments where you were maybe getting something and that was a scoop, or you were in the right place at the right time. One of your favorites as a freelancer.
Yeah, there are several of those. And probably one of the best ones, where I probably made the most money ever in one day, was Pete Rose in 1985 was chasing Ty Cobb's all-time hits record. And he
Mhm.
was at Wrigley Field. Heck, I'm trying to remember who he played for then. The Phillies? I forgot now.
I can't
So
help.
it's a Saturday. He's not scheduled to play, even though he's a switch hitter, because the Cubs are pitching Steve Trout. Okay. Steve Trout has an accident on his exercycle. He can't pitch that day. Pete Rose is installed in the lineup. And so suddenly everybody's calling me. We want coverage of the game. By everybody, I have 20 clients and a number of them
Wow.
live. So I've got, you know, one phone plus I think the Wrigley Field phone, and I am going back and forth. And I believe he tied the record that day and was not in the lineup the next day. And it was an extraordinary experience because it was a dark day. It was about to rain. I think I was live, rarely live, with National Public Radio's Weekend Edition. And it was a fabulous experience because not only was I part of history, I made a lot of money.
And that is never to be sneezed at, never to be sneezed at. And as
as
a
as a
freelancer, wow.
as a let me tell you, as a freelancer, that's what you want. And
Yes.
sometimes events happen like that, and you are lucky that you have a reputation. And I had built a reputation very quickly as a freelancer, and that helped me a great deal.
And so then you went to the, well, we have another picture, Fritz. I think then you went to the, was this when at the score?
Yes, just prior to that, I had been bugging the legendary and late Red Modlow, who's a broadcast Hall of Famer,
Remember him.
who was one of the first radio journalists along with Brad Palmer in this city. And I kept
Mhm.
bugging Red, get me on the air, let me do your shift when you are gone for vacation. Well, they finally let me on the air. And that eventually led me to WMAQ All News, which was then the competitor for WBBM. It was the Westinghouse station. And by the way, Ron Gleason was working there. Helped me get in there. And eventually, when Ron became the program director of the new all sports station, WSCR, I was hired there in 1992. That was the promotional picture. This is a picture, I think, a number of years later when vests were still vests. And that was an amazing experience to work with a whole bunch of people, some of whom I knew and some of whom I did not know, including Mike North, who really became the calling card of the station. I was
Mhm.
My sole job there was to be the principal anchor and reporter. And suddenly I am going to spring training and I'm covering the Blackhawks in playoff games and the Stanley Cup. And so my life changed, and it changed for the better. And yet I was still freelancing. So I had now two big jobs and was very, very busy and and loving it more than ever before, because I was on the ground floor. It was now become a treasure in the city, and that's one of the all sports stations.
Yeah, 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 definitely. And so then you, and it was 10, then you went to PBM, correct? Is that accurate? Is that what the trajectory of your career?
No, what happened? There was a couple of interesting stops in between. I left the score to join an operation called Webio, which was run by Mike North, and it was an internet radio operation. Unfortunately, it didn't take long for us to find out that it was funded by a scam artist.
Oh,
And it lasted 9 weeks, and suddenly we were all out of jobs. That
wow.
person, by the
Yeah.
way, eventually went to jail. And so there were people like myself, Jesse Rogers, Jonathan Hood, um, who were all looking for work. Those two guys have flourished since. What happened
Mhm.
to me was I obviously was looking for work, and was about a month later hired to do part-time work by Dave Ennett at WGN Radio. Dave is
Oh,
a longtime veteran, and I think most people will agree, if there was a Mount Rushmore of sports media in this town, Dave would be top of the heap. And yet,
great
in
way to,
that time, I suffered a paralyzed vocal cord, and I
oh
could
no.
not talk for 3 months. Yeah, it was really something. I just couldn't speak. We went to a voice institute, and they were helping me along the way. But eventually, we did a little bit of an operation. I was able to get my voice back, and Dave still hired me 4 months later, and I worked at WGN, which included one fabulous moment in my career when they said, George, would you like to travel to Game 6 of the Stanley Cup Finals because the Blackhawks have a chance to win in Philadelphia? Well, son of a gun, I was there. And part of WGN's broadcast crew, I was sitting on the bench 30 seconds after Patrick Kane had scored that phantom goal. And there I was on the Blackhawks bench watching a Stanley Cup within like 5 feet of me. And that's just an experience of a lifetime, and that was lucky, and that's thanks to Dave. And it was 2 months later that I was hired by WBBM. Things
Oh, that
happen.
is wonderful.
Oh,
Yeah,
yeah.
things do happen. Do happen, and being in the right place at the right time is, is not always luck. It's also experience, intentionality, and understanding your job, right? Uh, so, so we have another picture here. I think of you. Do we have something here? Yes,
Oh
there we
my
go. As we
goodness.
go. Yeah.
This is
Isn't
what
that
Harry
handsome?
Carey says. George is chasing out the pretty girl. No, unfortunately, that picture is, I think, possibly after I was already married. But that's just another promotional picture from the Score Radio. We did quite a few of those. Yeah, we're just aging as we go along here. Be careful because we're about to lose our hair now, I think, as we go forward. But those
Let
were
me ask.
just a bunch. There we
Wait,
go.
and
That one was done
there you
broadcasting for WBBM probably no more than I'd say about a month ago.
go. Oh, oh.
And this
So can I
is
ask?
how we did it.
So when you got married, was it harder to be a roving sports reporter?
Well, it wasn't long, maybe 7 years after that I stopped freelancing.
Mhm.
And just prior to getting married, I was offered a job as a talk show host in Toronto, which
Wow.
was a network and a longtime host who I had been working with since 1980. And they offered me the job. I turned it down. It was a very difficult thing to do because Toronto is an absolutely beautiful city. And I took a gamble that I might be hired by the Score, and 2 months later, the gamble paid off. So that was a gamble to take, to leave the country and to go to the
Wow.
essence of which, it's Toronto's great, but it is a different country with different sports. But they were willing to take a shot at me. I just decided I'm a Chicagoan. Let's see if I can keep going here. And luckily for me, I did.
Well, so you also have kept going during a period where there really has been no sports, right? You've been covering sports in a pandemic. And, how has that been? What has that charged your creativity? Has it, or has there been more stories coming at you than we could imagine?
Part of it was really creativity. You had
Mhm.
to create new content. Part of it was the pandemic. Part of it was we need to speak to individuals on how the pandemic is affecting them, from
Mhm.
colleges to professional. Um, and in the interim, we also had something that was kind of beneficial, and that was The Last Dance with Michael Jordan. Those
Yeah.
10 episodes, which ran 5 weeks, became great talking points for everybody from sports radio to us, so that I'm interviewing players who played on that team, from Dickie Simpkins and Will Perdue and Bill Wennington and Randy Brown, other people, and you're making stories out of that. And you had to find a way to be very creative. I actually flourished for these last 4 months in creating content uh, that was worthwhile to listen to, even though we had no sports. And
Wow.
recently, when sports started to come back with the baseball practice and the Blackhawks, you had Zoom press conferences. Let me tell you something. Zoom has taken over to the point where it was inundating you every minute. It was a Zoom interview here and a Zoom interview there. It didn't matter, though. You were busy. So during that part of the pandemic, we found ways to be very creative, and it was a wonderful experience because it taught you there are ways to continue to report when there's nothing to report.
So, do you, at this stage here, where where you're looking to the future on everything, what do you think about the future in terms of digital radio and where you may go that way? What do you see the industry doing? I mean, it's obviously evolving, right? And continues to evolve and has evolved for your whole career. Do you see it lasting another 100 years? Do you see it? Some people say, "Oh, it's going to die out," and I don't know if I believe that one.
Well, I'm not gonna take the crystal ball and go 100 years.
Okay, fair.
Clearly, radio is changing. Um, Certainly, podcasts have become very big, and there are a million. When I say a million, I mean literally a million podcasts, and a number of them in sports. Uh, but it is shrinking, and I think what's happening now is could be very alarming to the media that once we get back to normal, normal may be what's taking place now. Instead of being able to go into locker rooms and interview players, we may be forced to be on Zoom. That would not be a good thing because you could not really create stories like that unless you're dealing with individuals and sometimes one on one. So there's a fear that that's going to change. And I can't tell you what's going to happen in this industry. I'm lucky in a way that I've had 47 years in it. And I'm going to have to adapt if I want to continue to stay in the business. I am not going to be writing any tell all books because there's not much for me to tell. But I think that it's going to be a very different. I mean, we're seeing it now, and I mean the pandemic is not helping very much. I worry for my brethren. I worry for the guys in the newspaper business, and I worry for the people in the radio business that things are changing dramatically. But how they're changing, we all have to adapt to. So
Right.
who knows? One of these days, sports radio might be what Mike North envisioned 11 years ago, it being strictly internet radio, which is what we have now, but no more live radio, but live internet stuff. We'll see.
So maybe we can even co-opt you to do a couple things. Maybe blog for us a little bit about the sports radio industry and where things are in these last 100 years. But I would love to keep talking to you, and I know I'm one of your fans, and I know all of us would love to keep hearing from you. So we're very lucky that you joined us here today.
Thank you so much, and I hope that you will be hearing from me one day soon. Thank you, Susie.
I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. And I would like everybody to invite us to join us again next week at 5:30 here on Facebook and YouTube. But also, don't forget on Fridays, if you're looking to get your fill of reality TV, you can join my colleagues from the museum, Eileen Bishop and Olivia Jackson, and they will be talking about reality TV on 5:30 on Instagram. And thank you so much for joining us this week.